My name is Todd Watrous, for those who don't know. I appreciate y'all being here. I tried to keep this quiet so no one would show up. So someone would show up. But anyway, it is good to see everyone. Yes, Cleo asked me to do this. Cleo, I love my brother Cleo. I don't give him any, I always just ask me, brother, just ask me. But what was funny about this time, though, was when he came up with this long list. And he said, brother, I need just one more. Just one more. I said, okay. I said, what are we doing? Parables. I said, okay. I said, so you're telling me we're down to one? And he goes, yes. I said, oh, now, are you curious to find out what parable no one else chose that ended up falling to me? So it's actually, interesting enough, it's actually parables mixed in, but I decided to change it up a little bit. I call it the parables of the bridegroom, cloth, wineskins, and those who drink wine. Because there's a lot rolled up into that little package right there in order to explain all this. Excuse me as I got dry throat. A lot of singing tonight, you know. All right. But thank you, Cleo, for asking. So we're good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through, and we're going to start in Matthew 9, verses 14 through 18, Matthew chapter 9. Then I'm going to read Mark 2, and I'll announce that in just a moment, and then Luke 5. So we're going to cover that little gambit so we can get a sort of a picture of what's going on here. And I think you're going to hear a very common reoccurrence of what's happening with this story. Matthew 9, starting in verse 14. Then the disciples of John came to him, asking, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "The attendants of the bridegroom cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. But no one puts a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. For the patch pulls away from the garment, and a worse tear results. Nor do people put new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wineskins burst, and the wine pours out, and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved." Now we're going to go to Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 18. So if you would like to turn there, you're welcome to. Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 18. John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and they came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "While the bridegroom is with them, the attendants of the bridegroom cannot fast, can they? So long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it, and the new from the old, and a worse tear results. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and the skins as well. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins." All right, Luke 5. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 33. Luke chapter 5, verse 33. "And they said to him, 'The disciples of John often fast and offer prayers. The disciples of the Pharisees also do the same. But yours eat and drink.' And Jesus said to them, 'You cannot make the attendants of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them, can you? But the days will come, and when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast in those days.' And he was also telling them a parable. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, he will both tear the new. Otherwise, he will both tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled out, and the skins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wishes for new, for he says, the old is good enough. All right. I read all three of those because do you hear how similar they are? Right on the money, right? I think it's interesting Luke throws in a little bit about someone drinking the wine. All right, we're going to discuss that a little bit more here in just a moment. So let's just get through basic physics. All right? So, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on why we have cloth tearing this and the wineskins. I think we might understand this. Now, I don't know the last time, except for maybe Nathan, that anyone has skinned an animal and then tanned it and maybe used it. I don't know if you use it for wineskins or not, brother, but it's very interesting when you start dealing with that. But if you have cloth, let's talk about cloth. I think we understand that if you take cotton, for instance, and you have an old cotton shirt that's one of your favorites, right, Rocky? You got a favorite, right? And it's got a tear in it. So you're like, well, I'll just get a patch off this new one that's never been washed before. I'll just take this new patch and I'm just going to cut it to the size I need it. I'm going to sew it on this one, and then you go to wash that one later. And what happens? Well, the patch shrinks up. And it tears everything, and now it's made a worse mess because it's torn all the threads and everything. I think we all understand that. They're not compatible. Same thing with the new wine in old wineskins. Leather, and that's what we usually call, we don't usually go around and say, hey, our wineskins. Now, my dad was a leather. He worked with a lot of stuff, but he did leather. I got several garments that my dad actually made, handcrafted out of leather. One of them I put on, and it takes 3 people to help me get out of it. But anyways, and I would say it's a buckskin shirt, but it's not. It's actually buckskin out of cowhide, which is thicker than all get out. But anyways, it's a great wind block if you're up in the mountains, but that's another story. What we have here is a nice patch off of a deer. This is actually very soft. See how flimsy it is? But it's very soft. My dad would make moccasins out of this. And so that's very soft. You can play these later on if you'd like. This is just a piece of cowhide. It's pretty thick compared to the deer. It's not quite as soft. You might not want a pair of pants out of this. But, But it's the next, so you go really soft, then you go sort of rugged, and then you get to this piece. This here is a piece that's been dried out. Now, if y'all know anything about rawhide, they used to take it and wrap it around saddle horns. They used to do it with a lot of different things. They would wrap it and make handles out of things because they were really great for handles. But you can take this after it's been dried out very slowly. It's basically like leather jerky, best way to put that. They've literally almost extracted the oils out of it and the moisture out of it, so it's almost hard, like plastic. So they would wrap this bad boy around, and then they would wet it, and then they would stretch it and wrap it around like a saddle horn or whatever, and it made it tougher. So when they were running their ropes around the saddle horn and they're burning everything, that rawhide would take the main burn. So this stuff's pretty tough once it dries back out again. This you would not make a wineskin out of. So why do we discuss leather? Well, that's what we're talking about, wineskins, physics. Old wineskins have been stretched out and they've been gone beyond where they're able to flex anymore. They've gotten hard. You take new wine, put it in there, wine ferments. The new wine will ferment. When it ferments, anybody knows it expands. Anybody, bake with yeast? You take some yeast, you put it into warm water with some sugar, you walk away a few minutes, you come back and you get a nice it's grown up, it's frothing, it's living, it's expanding. Well, when you have it inside a closed container, that's what's happening. It expands it. So it can rip your leather. It can tear your wine skin. So they put it in a nice flexible leather, brand new leather, the kind that still has flexibility. It can still stretch. Everything works out good. So as it's expanding, the wine's expanding, so is the leather. And then there's a point where the wine quits expanding. It has nothing else to grow on. It's reached its peak. And so the leather goes with it, and then it all works nicely together. So new wine and new wine skins. I'm going to keep that in your mind. It's a very key point here. All right, so enough of the physics lesson. Let's move on. So what does all this mean? Well, sometimes you need a refresher course. I remember when I got this, I thought, man, this is going to be a really short lesson. Then I started doing a study on it. And Scott, I know you've heard us say this. Scott said this many times. You start studying something, you're like, oh my goodness, this is getting deeper than I thought it was going to go. So it's sort of cool to think about. So I try to summarize it all down into these thoughts. There's a mention of the bridegroom. The bridegroom is Jesus, our Lord. Why did Jesus bring this up? When he's being asked, again, it's the Pharisees and the disciples of the Pharisees, and there's the disciples of John the Baptist. Interesting combo. Have you ever thought about that? It's like they almost tag team together and have showed up to say and question Jesus. It's interesting. You wouldn't expect that. The Pharisees and John the Baptist are tag teaming against Jesus and questioning him in public. I mean, think about it. So I did some studies on it, and almost everybody that I read that's in the Brotherhood that did commentaries were in agreement that there appeared to be some kind of a little group of the John the Baptist, this is sort of theoretical, that apparently were a little jealous of Jesus. John the Baptist is no longer around, maybe there's something going on, and the Pharisees are like, oh, Pharisees, let's face it, they're good at the politics, so they bring in this little group, and they said, why is it that you guys are fasting, and we're fasting, but Jesus and his disciples aren't fasting? And so somewhere in the middle of all this, they just sparked this little conversation. Let's go ask Jesus. Oh, it's sort of interesting. I had never thought about it like that, but it is interesting. So, well, they get up there, and right off the bat, Jesus, being awesome as he is, he basically does this. Because why did Jesus bring up the bridegroom? He said because he was quoting John the Baptist. That's the key point. He was quoting John the Baptist when he said the bridegroom as a trigger to their memory that these disciples of John would maybe go, oh. So I got to say, let's take a look at John chapter 3, verses 26 through 30. So Jesus quotes John the Baptist. So John 3, starting in verse 26. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and everyone is going to him. And John answered, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves bear witness of me that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. But the friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is fulfilled. This is John the Baptist. Therefore this joy of mine is fulfilled. He, being Jesus, must increase, but I must decrease. So, the reason I say it's very interesting to me is that Jesus, right off the bat, he already puts this whole little allied group together. He's already just broke them up. Because now the John the Baptist disciples are going, oh, yeah, we sort of forgot about that. And I think that's why he said that. So, just sort of an interesting thought. So, moving on. The old cloth versus the new cloth. All right. Well, I'm going to do this. Galatians 3:10, I think you'll recognize this, is quoting from Deuteronomy. For all who depend on works of the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed be everyone who does not persevere in doing all the things written in the book of the law. So here's my take on this. The old cloth, Jesus is talking about the law. And the new cloth, he's talking about the covenant that he is bringing. A totally new covenant. Now hold that thought because we're going to come back around to this in a little while. All right. Hebrews chapter 5. Hebrews chapter 5 verses 9 through 10. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation, being designated by God as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, what do we know about that? Well, if you know anything about that section of Hebrews, if you know anything about Melchizedek, Melchizedek predates the Levites. Y'all know that, right? If you go back and look in the Old Testament, he predates them. He was not of the Levitical priesthood. That means he predated the law of Moses. And Jesus, in Hebrews chapter 5, is equated to Melchizedek, not of the Levitical priesthood. A different priest, a different covenant established by God. So my point here is that Jesus is laying out on the foundation that there is an old cloth and I am bringing a new cloth, and the two are not compatible. Let's continue in Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews 7, starting in verse 18. For on the one hand, there is a setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. And on the other hand, there is a bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to God. And inasmuch as it was not without an oath, for they indeed become priests without an oath, but he with an oath through the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever. So much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. The former priests, on the one hand, existed in greater numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing. Well, that's pretty simple. Every time a Levitical priest, Aaron, number one, right? Aaron died. So we needed another Levitical priest, right? And so on and so on and so on. And that's what this part's about. But with Jesus and this new order and something that's separate from the law of Moses and the whole Levitical priesthood, there's only one. One priest that's eternal, and that's Jesus. And I will continue to read right here. So, for it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, this is verse 26 of Hebrews, 7? Yeah, Hebrews 7, all right. For it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners and exalted above the heavens, who does not need daily, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices. First for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. So you remember the Levitical priesthood, if you understand that, it was a man, a sinful, flawed man who was a Levitical priest. He had to atone for his own sins before he could begin atoning for other people's sins in Israel. So he had to take care of his own self, right? Jesus didn't have to do this. Jesus, again, separate covenant, separate priesthood, established by God. This is is why I think, and I lay this all out before you, the old cloth is the old law. Jesus is bringing in the new law, the new cloth. The two cannot be compatible. All right. So then, and Hebrews 8:13, there's this, when he said a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. But whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to disappear. Then it mentions the new wine. So the new wine is the covenant of Jesus Christ. It's this whole gospel of Christ, everything that we have been saved through. And that's what he's calling the new wine. So he's not going to put the new wine has to go into new wineskins. All right? The old wineskins are disciples of the old law, which in this case may have included some of John the Baptist's disciples who desired the old law. And the new wineskins are Jesus' disciples. Jesus was filling his disciples with the new covenant. And so there's an explanation of the wineskins, the wine. So you get to Luke 5, verse 39, and it said, the person drinking the old wine, the one that says, that's good enough. Well, what's that about? Well, I'll throw this at you. The person drinking old wine is an additional emphasis that the new, which is coming through Jesus, will be rejected by those who choose to hold on to the old. And that's, and I take this, and I'm going back to Matthew. Oh, actually, before I do that, I want to read from John chapter 5. So John chapter 5, verses 39 and 40. Jesus is having a very lively discussion or debate with the Jews in Jerusalem. And Jesus says, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. It is these that testify about me. And you are unwilling to come to me so that you may have life. And then in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and 18, Jesus said, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law, and this is a key point, until all is accomplished. So what is all being accomplished? It's the new covenant. It is Jesus suffering, dying on a cross, and then being resurrected. That was accomplished. You know Psalm 22? Psalm 22 is a psalm of David. It is a prophetic psalm of David. If you've ever read it and studied it, you can see that it completely talks about Jesus. Most of it is talking about Jesus as he is being put on this cross and suffering on a cross. So Psalm 22 is really very interesting, but there's the last verse that I wanted to focus on is Psalm 22:31. They will come and declare his righteousness to a people who will be born, that he has done this. It ends with he has done this, and I like the way James Burton Kaufman in his commentary put it. He said, Kittner pointed out that just as the psalm began with its first verse in the mouth of Jesus on the cross, it ends in the same manner. He hath done it. It is an announcement not very far removed from another word of Jesus from the cross, namely, it is finished. So that is what the old wine versus the new wine. There is those who will hold on to the old, but Jesus is saying, I am the new. We have that. We get that. But I believe that's exactly what these parables are talking about as we go through that. There was another description that I really liked that actually was also in Burton Kaufman's commentary. He was talking about if you build a building, a tall building, and you have scaffolding. If you've ever seen these buildings and they have the scaffolding, it's up all the way around the exterior of the building. You really can't tell what's going on most of the time. These days we've got canvases up around them to keep the dust down and harming people from stuff. But they got all this scaffolding. It's around the exterior of the building, and you can hear noise going on and you don't really know what's going on with it. He described that scaffolding as the old law. That scaffolding is helping with the construction of the building. The old law did help with the bringing of the new covenant, because again Jesus said he was here to fulfill the law. So when you get done with the scaffolding, the building's been constructed. Where does the scaffolding go? Is it still with the building? No. The scaffolding's gone, right? The building's completed. You don't need the scaffolding on the outside of the building any longer. What does the scaffolding have to do with the structure of the building? After the building's complete, the scaffolding is now in the way. It's an eyesore. It's time to go. Its usefulness has ended. And that's the way, I thought it was a pretty nice description, because now we have the temple. We now have the church, whose capstone is Jesus. The cornerstone is Jesus. And so there you have the new covenant. And there we have the parables of the bridegroom, the cloth, the wineskins, and those who drink wine. I hope that sort of makes sense. If you have any questions, comments, you're welcome to ask them now. I am not a scholar or a professor. I am just simply a guy who got asked to pick up the last parables. No, anyways, but anyways, I thank y'all. I know it's a short lesson. If you want to come and check out the leather, you're welcome to. Anyways, I love you guys very much. If you would join me in a prayer, I would appreciate it.